He mocked her in high school and called her the ugliest girl. 20 years later, she walks into the alumni ball and stuns the entire room. What she became will leave you speechless. Fallon Carver wasn't the kind of man who ever looked back. At 38, he was one of the most powerful venture capitalists in the country. His name whispered in boardrooms and printed in glossy magazines. His penthouse in Austin overlooked the city like a throne. His closet held tailored suits worth more than some people's mortgages. And yet, on a quiet Thursday morning, he found himself staring at an envelope with trembling hands. It was cream-colored, elegant, almost old-fashioned. Handwritten in perfect cursive, the name on the front hit him like a memory he didn't ask for. Fallon J. Carver. Inside was a formal invitation, wrapped in a ribbon. The return address was from his old high school, St. Julian Academy, a private institution he hadn't thought about in nearly 2 decades. The letter invited him to the 20-year reunion and alumni ball, but that wasn't what made his stomach twist. Tucked inside, separate from the invitation, was a small note on lavender stationery. Just one sentence, signed at the bottom. Still holding you to your promise. Gwendolyn March. His heart dropped. He hadn't heard that name in 20 years. Gwendolyn March. The girl everyone called Ugly Gwen behind her back, and often to her face. She was awkward, painfully shy, with thick glasses, crooked teeth, frizzy red hair, and a noticeable stutter. Kids could be cruel. He had been cruel. Fallon knew that better than anyone. And yet, he had made her a promise. Back in senior year, on a dare from his football teammates, he walked up to her in the hallway and made a loud joke that turned into something sincere. Yeah, and if you're still single in 20 years, Gwen, I'll take you to the alumni ball myself. Deal? She had smiled, so quietly and carefully. Deal. He never thought she'd remember, but she had. And now, after years of running billion-dollar companies, navigating boardroom wars, and surviving a brutal divorce, he was faced with a strange question. Could he keep a promise he never thought would matter? His assistant, Mabel, an older, no-nonsense woman who had worked for him since the start of his career, walked in and saw the letter on his desk. You okay, boss? Fallon didn't look up. Do you believe in fate, Mabel? Only when it shows up wearing heels and revenge, she smirked. He chuckled softly. She remembered. Mabel raised an eyebrow. The girl you bullied and made that stupid promise to? He winced. Yeah, her. Mabel folded her arms. Then you owe her. Go. Put on a suit, show up, and maybe be the man you weren't back then. He stared at the note again. Still holding you to your promise. He picked up a pen, checked the RSVP box, and whispered to himself, Okay, Gwendolyn, I'll see you there. The days leading up to the reunion were surprisingly quiet for Fallon Carver. Not in terms of meetings or financial negotiations, those were endless as always. But in his mind, a rare stillness had settled, and yet under that stillness, something unusual stirred. He found himself thinking about Gwendolyn March at odd moments. During investor calls, while sipping his morning coffee, even while overlooking the Austin skyline from his penthouse balcony. It wasn't just curiosity, it was discomfort, guilt, and something else he couldn't name yet. Fallon had built his empire by ignoring the past. He didn't talk about the car crash that killed his parents when he was 25, the tragedy that hardened him overnight. He didn't speak of his divorce either, which had been splashed across tabloids 5 years earlier when his ex-wife, a former model named Veronica, publicly accused him of being emotionally absent. He never denied it. How could he? It was true. He had become a man of calculated walls, precise, measured, untouchable. And now here he was, pacing his penthouse barefoot at midnight, with a 30-year-old yearbook in one hand and a glass of whiskey in the other. He sat down on the leather couch and flipped through the yearbook. Faces stared back at him. Young, frozen versions of people he barely remembered. Then he saw her. Gwendolyn March. Senior photo. Second to last page. She was even more awkward than he remembered. Hair frizzed out on both sides, eyes not quite aligned with the camera. A hint of braces visible under her shy smile. He remembered the day of that photo. They had all laughed at her behind the bleachers. His friends Cole, Derek, Jared had made jokes so loud she'd heard every word. Fallon had laughed too. Not because he found it funny, but because back then he needed to be liked, needed to fit in. And mocking Gwendolyn was a social shortcut. But there was one moment he'd never forgotten. When he caught her crying in the girls' locker room hallway after school. He hadn't meant to see her. He wasn't even supposed to be there. But she'd looked up at him with wet, swollen eyes and said, "I know I'm not pretty, but that doesn't mean you get to be cruel." He never forgot it. Now, 20 years later, he still remembered every word. And he remembered something else, too. The strange sense of shame that washed over him in that moment. It was probably the first time in his life he questioned who he was becoming. But of course, life moved on. College, business school, tech startups, buyouts, IPOs, magazine covers, divorces, loneliness. Fallon wasn't sure what surprised him more, that she remembered the promise, or that she had the courage to remind him of it. The next morning, he stood in his massive walk-in closet, flipping through tuxedos, Armani, Tom Ford, custom Italian wool. None of them felt right. He pulled out an old navy blue suit from 10 years ago and laid it on the bed. A little less polished, a little more human. He had Mabel arrange a private flight to the town he hadn't seen in 2 decades. She looked at him over her glasses with her usual blunt expression. "Any chance you're doing this to feel better about who you used to be?" "Maybe," Fallon said quietly. "Or maybe I just want to see who she became." Mabel tilted her head. "Just don't be surprised if she's the one who doesn't need you anymore." He smiled faintly, a little afraid she was right. That night, for the first time in years, Fallon dreamed of high school. Not the parties or the locker rooms, but a quiet hallway, a shy girl with a notebook clutched to her chest, and a promise he never thought he'd keep. The day of the reunion arrived under an overcast sky, the kind that matched Fallon's unsettled thoughts. He flew in early, alone, avoiding press and shareholders, giving his security team the weekend off. He wanted no noise, no distractions, just clarity. St. Julian Academy sat on the outskirts of a sleepy Texas town, still surrounded by old oak trees and black iron gates. As the sleek black car pulled up the winding path, Fallon stared out the window in silence. The school hadn't changed much. Same brick walls, same ivy-covered columns, same carved stone motto above the main entrance. Virtus ante omnia, virtue above all. The irony wasn't lost on him. Inside, the main hall had been transformed for the evening. Twinkling lights hung from the rafters, round tables draped in white linen, and a small jazz band warming up in the corner. A banner stretched across the top of the room, St. Julian Academy, class of 2005 reunion. He arrived early enough to be one of the first guests. The event planner, a bubbly woman in her 40s, nearly tripped over herself trying to welcome him. "Oh my God, Mr. Carver. I mean, Fallon, you look amazing. Everyone's going to freak out when they see you." He smiled politely, thanked her, and moved toward the corner of the room. He wanted to stay back, observe, blend in. But that didn't last long. One by one, former classmates began to trickle in. And with them came the whispers, the looks, the forced charm of people who now saw him less as a peer and more as a trophy. "Fallon Carver? No way. Dude, is it really you? Can I get a selfie with you? My wife won't believe it." He obliged, he posed, he smiled. He answered the same 5 questions over and over again. "What are you working on now? Are you still in tech? Are you married? Do you remember me?" He remembered too many of them, especially the ones who used to lead the cruelty. Then came Larissa Camden, former head cheerleader, homecoming queen, and self-declared goddess of the school. She approached him in a crimson gown that sparkled under the chandeliers. "Fallon," she purred, touching his arm like they'd always been close. "You've aged like... wow." He gave her a distant smile. "Larissa, you look exactly the same." She beamed, either missing the subtext or ignoring it. "So, tell me, are you here alone?" "I'm waiting for someone," he replied, scanning the crowd again. Gwendolyn hadn't arrived yet. "Oh," Larissa tilted her head, intrigued. "A mystery woman? Don't tell me you brought your wife." "I'm not married." Her eyes sparkled with opportunity. "Then maybe fate brought us back together, huh?" He gave a polite chuckle, but didn't respond. His eyes stayed fixed on the entrance. The hall grew louder. The tables began to fill. Laughter bounced off the walls. And still, she hadn't appeared. Fallon checked his watch, the edge of doubt creeping in. What if this had been a joke? A final way to humiliate him after all these years? He was about to step away and grab a drink when it happened. The room went silent. As if on cue, the doors at the far end of the hall slowly opened. Heads turned, conversations stopped mid-sentence, even the jazz band paused. And then she walked in. Fallon's heart stopped. She moved with calm confidence, shoulders back, chin high, a vision in a sleek white gown that shimmered under the lights, with long, perfectly coiled dark hair cascading over one shoulder. Her posture, her grace. It was like she belonged to another world entirely, and yet every step she took was measured, purposeful, powerful. She looked nothing like the girl they had tormented, but her eyes. Fallon recognized those eyes. Gwendolyn March. Someone whispered, "No way. That can't be her." But it was. She met his gaze across the room. Her lips curved into the slightest, knowing smile. "Hi, Fallon," she said, walking up to him. Her voice was steady, rich with maturity, but unmistakably hers. "You came," he murmured. "I keep my promises," she said. "Even the ones made by people who didn't think they would." Fallon couldn't speak. For one of the most powerful men in the country, a man who had once closed billion-dollar deals with nothing but his voice, he now found himself utterly, helplessly silent. Standing before him was Gwendolyn March, the girl whose name had once been synonymous with every cruel joke in school, and now, the woman who drew the stunned eyes of every person in the ballroom without saying a word. She was radiant, not in the artificial, polished way of Hollywood glamour, but with a quiet, unshakable presence. The kind of beauty that came not just from looks, but from power, resilience, and a self-knowledge most people never reach. He tried to say something, anything, but all that came out was, "You look." She tilted her head, playful. "Different?" He exhaled a short laugh. "Not different, just more you. Like the person you always were, finally stepped forward." Her smile softened. "That's a nicer way to say it than I'm used to." The silence between them lingered. Not awkward, not cold, but thick with things unsaid. "Can I get you a drink?" he asked, grasping at something familiar. "Club soda with lime," she replied without hesitation. "I haven't touched the alcohol in 10 years. He nodded and disappeared toward the bar, weaving through the crowd still buzzing with whispers. Everyone was trying to process what they had just seen. When Fallon returned, she was standing by one of the tall windows that overlooked the courtyard. The same courtyard where, 20 years ago, she'd sat alone during lunch. He handed her the drink, and they stood side by side, the hum of the reunion muffled behind them. "I didn't think you'd actually come," he admitted. "I didn't think you'd remember," she countered. "But you did." "I remembered more than just the promise," he said quietly. "I remembered who I was back then, and who I wasn't." Gwendolyn looked over at him, her expression unreadable. "Do you remember why you made that promise?" He thought for a moment. "It started as a joke. I wanted to look like a hero in front of my friends. But when I saw the way you looked at me, like you actually believed I meant it, I didn't want to take it back." She nodded slowly. "I did believe you, even after everything, because deep down, you were the only one who saw me and didn't laugh first." "I did laugh," he said, ashamed. "Plenty of times. But not that day," she said. "That day, you gave me something no one else did. Hope. It was stupid and small and built on nothing, but it got me through one more week, one more month. It gave me time to grow teeth." He blinked. "Grow teeth?" She smiled. "Figure of speech. I stopped hiding. Started fighting for myself." Fallon looked at her like she was made of fire and steel. "What did you become, Gwendolyn?" She turned to face him fully, chin lifted with quiet pride. "I became a woman who builds empires. I became a voice for people who've been silenced. I became someone who no longer needs saving or promises. But I came tonight because a part of me wanted to see if you became someone worth meeting again." He was quiet, taking in her words. "I hope I am," he finally said. "You're here," she replied. "That's a start." The music inside swelled again, and someone tapped a glass, signaling the official beginning of the evening's program. Fallon held out his hand. "May I have this dance?" Gwendolyn glanced at it, her expression unreadable for a heartbeat. Then, with a slight smile, she placed her hand in his. "You may." As they moved to the dance floor, eyes followed them. Former classmates, teachers, even Larissa, frozen in disbelief. The former ugliest girl now danced with the man everyone wanted to be. And yet it wasn't him who had won. It was her, and Fallon knew it. The night unfolded like a story neither of them expected to live. Fallon and Gwendolyn danced for one full song, then another. He wasn't much of a dancer. He'd admitted that up front with a sheepish grin, but she'd only smiled and said, "Then just follow my lead." And somehow that felt right. After the dance, they stepped away from the crowd and moved into a quieter side room off the main hall, a space lined with old photographs of the school's history and long-forgotten trophies in dusty glass cases. It was empty, lit only by the golden spill of hallway lights and the soft glow of moonlight through the tall windows. Fallon found himself grateful for the stillness, not because the noise outside was unbearable, but because what he needed to say couldn't be said with eyes watching. Gwendolyn walked slowly, her hand tracing along the edge of a bookshelf filled with faded yearbooks. He cleared his throat. "So you said you became someone who builds empires. What does that mean exactly?" She glanced over her shoulder. "You haven't Googled me?" He shook his head. "I wanted to hear it from you." She nodded, then turned to face him fully. "After high school, I left town. I moved to Chicago with a scholarship. Barely got in anywhere, because my GPA was a mess from all the bullying and depression. But I fought, took night classes, waitressed, volunteered at a youth shelter. I worked on myself the same way most people work on a resume, relentlessly. Every insecurity, every piece of shame, every echo of laughter that followed me from St. Julian's, I turned them into fuel." She paused, looking at him to see if he was still listening. He was. Completely. "I got into design, started helping girls like me, girls who'd been told they were too weird, too ugly, too fat, too black, too something. Build confidence through style, voice coaching, therapy. I created a boutique agency. We started small, but now we're international. We're called March Forward." Fallon blinked. "As in, your name?" "Exactly," she said with a small smirk. "It's a play on both my name and the movement. March forward. Keep going. Never stop, no matter what they throw at you." He exhaled slowly, stunned. "That's incredible." "It's necessary," she replied. "No one ever handed me a second chance, Fallon. I had to fight for one." He nodded slowly. "I admire that." She studied him for a long moment. "And what about you? Beyond the headlines and the billions, what's left?" He looked away for a moment, then walked over to one of the tall windows, his reflection barely visible in the glass. "I lost my parents in a car crash when I was 25. I spent years chasing money because I thought if I had enough of it, I'd never feel powerless again. Then I married someone who loved the spotlight but hated the silence. She left when she realized I didn't know how to let anyone in." He turned back toward her. "I don't think I've ever really been known by someone, Gwendolyn. Not in the way you seem to know yourself." She didn't respond right away. Instead, she walked toward him slowly, her heels silent on the old floor. "Do you want to be known?" she asked, voice low. The question hit him harder than he expected. He wasn't sure how to answer. "I think I want to learn how." She stood just inches from him now, eyes locked with his. "Then maybe this isn't about who we were, or even who we are right now. Maybe it's about who we could be, if we gave ourselves permission to rewrite the ending." Fallon didn't reach for her. He didn't try to kiss her or close the space. Instead, he simply nodded. "Then tell me where to begin," he said. She smiled, warm and slow, like the sunrise after a long, stormy night. "Start by listening," she whispered, "and keep showing up." Outside the room, laughter echoed from the ballroom again. But inside this quiet pocket of time, Fallon Carver and Gwendolyn March stood face to face, not as who they had been, but as who they were finally brave enough to become. The next morning, Fallon woke in a modest hotel suite overlooking the quiet town he once couldn't wait to escape. The reunion was over, but the feeling wasn't. He stood barefoot by the window, sipping black coffee, watching the sunrise roll across the rooftops. His mind wasn't on business or emails or markets. It was on her, Gwendolyn. Everything about her unsettled and awakened something in him. Not just her transformation, though that was stunning, but her clarity. Her confidence wasn't performative. She had earned it, layer by brutal layer, while he'd spent years hiding behind money and silence. By noon, he found himself walking along Main Street, hands in his pockets, thoughts spiraling deeper. He stopped in front of a small bookstore cafe where they had agreed to meet. Through the glass, he saw her already inside, sitting at a window table, flipping through a journal, a pen behind her ear. Her presence, even still, felt larger than the space she occupied. She looked up and smiled when he entered. "You're early," she said. "So are you," he replied. She closed the journal and gestured to the seat across from her. "I ordered you tea. You don't seem like a second coffee guy." "You remember what I drink?" he asked, surprised. "I remember more than you think," she said softly. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. The weight of what was left unsaid finally pushed Fallon to speak. "I need to say something," he began. "Something I've carried for years." Gwendolyn nodded, giving him space. "I was cruel to you. Not just once. Not just by laughing. I actively made your life harder. Because I was scared. Of being different. Of not being liked. I targeted you because it made them like me more. And I've hated myself for it ever since." Her eyes didn't flinch. She listened, absorbing his words with a quiet strength. "I remember the day I saw you cry," he continued, "in the hallway by the girls' locker room. You didn't even try to run. You just looked at me and said something that's haunted me ever since. Just because I'm not pretty doesn't mean you get to be cruel." She nodded slowly. "I remember saying that. I was 18 and full of fear. You were 14 and braver than me," he said. "And I'm sorry, Gwendolyn. Truly." There was a long silence between them. Not tense, just full. She finally exhaled. "I've carried those moments, too. Some of them left real scars. But I don't need revenge, Fallon. I needed to hear you say what you just did." He looked down, overwhelmed. "You have every right to hate me." "I don't," she said simply. "I pitied you back then, because I knew you were pretending to be someone you weren't. And now I see the man who wants to stop pretending. That matters more than who you were." He looked up, and for the first time in years, he felt seen. "I don't know what this is between us," he said honestly, "but I know I don't want to walk away from it." "Neither do I," she said. Then her expression shifted slightly, playful, almost teasing. "But don't think an apology gets you off the hook. If you want to be in my world, you have to earn your way in." He grinned, relieved by the invitation hidden in her challenge. "Then tell me where to start." "You already did," she said, and by showing up. Outside, the world moved on. But inside that quiet little cafe, two people, once connected by pain, now tethered by possibility, shared something fragile and rare, a chance to begin again. Over the next several weeks, Fallon and Gwendolyn stayed in contact, not through grand gestures or lavish gifts, but through quiet, honest connection. They spoke often, sometimes for hours at a time. Fallon found himself looking forward to her messages more than the stock reports that once ruled his mornings. Her voice, thoughtful and intentional, slowly replaced the static noise of his usual world. One evening, Gwendolyn called him just before midnight. Her tone was light, but direct. "I have an idea," she said. "Dangerous words coming from you," he teased. She laughed softly. "I'm flying to New York next week for a panel on inclusive design. My agency's opening a new office there. I thought, if you're serious about wanting to learn, maybe you'd like to come see what I actually do." "I'll be there," he said without hesitation. He booked a flight not as a VIP, not on a private jet, but coach. No entourage, no press alerts. For the first time in years, he wanted to be just Fallon. No last name, no image to protect. When he arrived, Gwendolyn met him at the entrance to a restored warehouse in Brooklyn. The space was filled with vibrant colors, exposed brick, high ceilings, and energy. Young women moved through the open-plan office with confidence. There were art installations on the walls, photos of women from every background, age, and shape. Some had scars, some used wheelchairs, some had vitiligo, others missing limbs. Fallon had never seen anything like it. "This is March Forward," Gwendolyn said with pride. "We represent over 300 models across 5 countries. But it's more than modeling. We coach, we train, we rebuild." He followed her through the floor, listening to her greet each staff member by name. Everyone respected her, not out of fear, but genuine admiration. Later that day, they sat in her office, a sunlit corner room with floor-to-ceiling windows and a wall of books. Fallon looked around, still stunned. "You built this from pain." She nodded. "I built this so no girl would have to live what I lived without knowing she had power." He looked at her carefully. "And what about you? What do you need now?" The question seemed to catch her off guard, but not in a bad way. "I want someone who sees the woman I am now," she said. "Not the girl I used to be. Not a symbol, Not a project, just me. Fallon's voice was soft. I see you, Gwendolyn. The next day, she invited him to speak at a mentorship event hosted by the agency. He stood nervously before a group of young women who had been bullied, discarded, underestimated. He didn't read a speech. He didn't boast about his success. Instead, he told the truth. I used to be the kind of boy who laughed when someone cried, he said. But now, the strongest person I know is someone I used to laugh at. She forgave me, not because I deserved it, but because she believes people can change. And I'm spending every day trying to prove her right. When he stepped down, the applause wasn't thunderous, but it was real. That night, Gwendolyn walked him to his hotel. They stood outside under the glow of the city lights. Quiet. You were honest today, she said. That's more than most people ever are. He nodded. I just wanted to be worthy of being in your world. She leaned forward, close enough for him to feel her breath. You already are, she whispered. And for the first time in his life, Fallon Carver felt like he belonged, not to a company or an empire, but to a future he never dared hope for. 1 year later, Fallon Carver stood at the edge of a sun-drenched rooftop garden in Manhattan, wearing a tailored linen suit, holding a glass of champagne he hadn't touched. The skyline stretched around him like a living painting, but his eyes weren't on the buildings. They were on her. Gwendolyn stood across the space, laughing with two young girls, new interns at March Forward, wearing a deep emerald dress that hugged her frame like it was designed just for her. Her hair was in soft waves tonight, and her presence, as always, commanded every glance in the room. But she wasn't putting on a show. She never had to. She was simply real. And that had become the rarest, most valuable thing in Fallon's life. This rooftop celebration marked the 1 year anniversary of March Forward's New York branch. It was also the official announcement of a new partnership, a venture co-founded by Fallon and Gwendolyn, focused on funding female-led startups, especially those built by survivors of bullying, discrimination, or trauma. They called it Second Flame. Fallon had stepped down from his last investment firm 3 months earlier. The press had called it shocking. Some labeled it a midlife crisis. Others guessed it was tied to a woman. Only a few understood. He'd finally found something he believed in more than numbers. And that something was her. Gwendolyn eventually made her way to him, champagne in hand, her smile effortless. You're staring again, she teased. He shrugged. I've learned to stop apologizing for admiring you. She arched a brow. Is that part of the reformed Fallon playbook? No, he said, stepping closer. That's just me, finally being honest. They clinked glasses but didn't drink. The moment didn't need it. A familiar voice called from behind. Larissa Camden. She was here tonight, surprisingly, as a freelance writer doing a feature on March Forward. After her failed reality show career fizzled, she had turned to journalism, and Gwendolyn, with her ever-graceful mercy, had allowed her a second chance. Larissa approached the couple with a hesitant smile. I just finished my piece, she said, tapping her phone. It's better than I expected. Honestly, Gwen, what you've built, it's impossible not to admire. Gwendolyn thanked her sincerely, not out of politeness, but because she meant it. As Larissa walked away, Fallon leaned in. You amaze me, he said quietly. You even managed to forgive her. She's still learning, Gwendolyn replied. We all are. He nodded, then reached into his pocket. His fingers hesitated for a heartbeat before pulling out a small velvet box. She noticed immediately, her breath catching. I know it's fast, he said gently, and I know you don't need anyone to complete your story. But if there's even the smallest part of you that wants to write the next chapters together, he opened the box. Inside was a ring, not enormous or extravagant, but timeless and elegant, just like her. Gwendolyn looked at it, then at him. Her eyes shimmered, not from surprise, but from understanding. I don't want a fairy tale, she whispered. I don't either, he said. I just want something real. She took the ring, slipped it on her finger herself, then she smiled. Then let's make it real. The crowd around them continued to laugh, sip, and talk, unaware that something sacred had just happened in their midst. Later that night, as the party ended and the city lights blinked across the horizon, Fallon and Gwendolyn stood together, hand in hand. And somewhere inside both of them, the broken teenager he had been and the invisible girl she used to be, finally smiled. Because against all odds, they had written an ending no one saw coming. And it was just the beginning. In my view, the ending of Fallon and Gwendolyn's story isn't just a romantic resolution, it's a quiet revolution. This tale began with cruelty, shame, and scars that lingered for decades. Fallon was a product of privilege and fear, someone who used power to hide his wounds. Gwendolyn was once the target of mockery, but instead of collapsing under the weight of humiliation, she built herself into a force without losing her compassion. That is, perhaps, the most powerful transformation of all. The ending isn't about a billionaire getting the girl. It's about redemption earned, not granted. About two people who, in very different ways, fought their way through pain to reclaim their voices and rewrite their identities. Gwendolyn doesn't need Fallon. That's why the love matters. It's chosen, not dependent. Mutual, not transactional. Their union isn't the culmination of a fairy tale. It's the beginning of something grounded, imperfect, but deeply real. A reminder that no matter how ugly the beginning, healing is possible, love is possible. And sometimes, the most beautiful stories are born from the broken places we were once told to hide. And that's a story worth telling.